Mass street protests in Egypt mark the second anniversary of the revolution there. Many of the promises remain unfulfilled and the country is bitterly divided. The state of Egypt's revolution 2 years on. This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Hazem Sika. This is Inside Story. January 25th, 2011. It was the start of 18 days that shook the Middle East. The uprising swept President Hosni Mubarak from power and brought democracy to what is the region's most populous country. But 2 years on, many Egyptians feel they have little to celebrate about. Hundreds of thousands filled Tahrir Square back in 2011. They demanded new jobs, education, the right to form political parties, a free press, and the end of dictatorship. And as Egyptians gather there once again on Friday, some of those demands have been met. But the country is still grappling with big problems. Egyptians are more divided than ever on how to fix their problems. On one side is a government dominated by Islamists. On the other, a secular opposition who say their voices are not being heard. And President Morsi has had a turbulent 7 months in office, but the Muslim Brotherhood is keen to highlight the government's achievements. These include the end of military rule and the election of Egypt's first civilian president. Elections also produced a House of Parliament, though the lower house has been dissolved. A new constitution was written and endorsed by the people in a popular referendum. But much of what's in that constitution is also one of the opposition's biggest grievances. Hosni Mubarak was put on trial, but his case hit a hurdle after he was granted a retrial. And despite Egypt's deep economic problems, foreign investment is starting to trickle in. Samsung recently signed a $1.7 billion deal to build its first Middle East factory in Egypt. And regional neighbors like Qatar have earmarked billions of dollars in grants and loans. Well, joining me now to talk more about this are our guests from Cairo. Wael Eskandar, blogger, journalist and political activist. He is taking part in Friday's protests. And joining us from Los Angeles, Hussein Ibish, a regular political contributor to publications such as Foreign Policy Magazine, The Atlantic and Hayat. We want to point out as well that we did try to get somebody from the Muslim Brotherhood, and we did have somebody lined up. But unfortunately, they were not able to attend at the time that we're recording this discussion. So apologies for that. But let's get started. And Wael Eskandar, if I can start with you. It's been a tumultuous 2 years in Egypt's history. How do you assess things as they currently stand?
I think that what has happened over the past 2 years is a strong fight from an existing regime to continue to exist in different forms. What we've seen over the past 2 years are demands that were completely ignored, and despite all the pressure that people have made for a real democratization of Egypt, we haven't seen a lot of that. What we've seen is basically the military holding on to powers and possibly even striking a deal with the Muslim Brotherhood so that it cements these powers. What we've seen is that the Muslim Brotherhood have long abandoned revolutionary goals over the past 2 years, and they've fed the public nothing but lies. So at this moment, it seems that nothing much has changed in the regime, the way it's been handling things and how it's been oppressing people and how and its autocratic measures. What we've seen, though, is the use of religious rhetoric to support that, and what we've seen is a discriminatory form of governance that doesn't seem to work. And this is why today there are so many people that are out there, and it's not a celebration, it's a continuation of the same demands and really rejecting the Muslim Brotherhood's monopoly on control and power and what they're trying to do by sidelining everyone else.
Hussein Ibish, how do you assess the state of Egypt's revolution 2 years on?
Well, I agree with almost everything that I just heard, and I think Wael is basically right in his analysis, essentially. And I would go further, and I would question, as I have from the outset, whether there has been actually a revolution in Egypt at all. I never thought there has been one, and I still don't think that there has been one exactly. I think what you had was a popular uprising that forced regime decapitation by the military, and then you've had a process of kind of a very delicate dance between certain political parties, in particular the Muslim Brothers, but others as well, and the military about a form of power sharing. But I have to agree with Wael that if you look at the situation as it exists in Egypt, and if you look at the constitution that was rammed through in a very odd way, with the with the declaration by President Morsi that was then withdrawn, kind of paving the way for getting this constitution through, and then approved publicly, no doubt, because I think people were kind of desperate for a some kind of governance structure. It does, above all, preserve the existing powers, prerogatives, economic holdings and such of the military. And I think my own view of the document is that it preserves most of what was worst in the old system and adds a layer of new problematic stuff that impinges potentially on the rights of individuals and minorities in the name of religion. And so this is not a revolutionary document. And this, I don't think, is a revolution in progress. I think it's something a little bit different.
When you say the Constitution was rammed through, can you elaborate on that? Because you also said that it was
absolutely
passed by a majority of those who voted, and the people who supported this say that that is democracy in action.
They do, and I think that goes directly to the heart of the kind of confusion that is dominant in post-dictatorship Arab societies. I've rejected the term revolutionary. I will say Egypt ought to be described as post-dictatorship Egypt. That's for sure. There's been a regime change. Egypt is not a dictatorship anymore. It's in some kind of a transition. I wouldn't call it democracy, as your intro package led to it. But there have been elections. So what are we talking about here? What I'm getting at is the distinction between majoritarianism, or strict majoritarianism, being able to command 50% plus one in any given poll, and democracy, because democracy means, I think, clearly a balance between the rights of majorities to govern, and majorities do have prerogatives, no doubt. 50% plus one confers certain prerogatives, but individuals retain their human rights, and minorities, women and other groups have and ought to have protections and rights and prerogatives that are beyond the control or say-so of majorities. And so here, I think, in terms of the Egyptian constitution, we have a very good example of that. When I say rammed through, I didn't mean in terms of the referendum, although it was very short. The time was exceptionally short. What I meant was the way that President Morsi aggregated unbelievable powers to himself, powers in excess of any previous modern Egyptian leader and any dictator, let it go on the grounds that the Constitution was going to be delivered, and on that basis it was sort of gotten through the political system very quickly. In a certain sense, I do think that the constitutional declaration that he issued granting himself total authority virtually was almost a ruse and a red herring to get the governance structures that exist to let the Constitution through. And then I think the people were likely to approve virtually anything out of a sort of a real keenness for some kind of stable governing structure. That's what I meant.
All right. Wael Eskandar, one of the criticisms, if I may bring it up, that's been made of secular voices like yourself is that that you lack a unified vision, and that you haven't been effective in rallying grassroots support the way that the Muslim Brotherhood has been able to do, because they, of course, have a long history of being able to do that, and in a sense they have an advantage in that respect. But the criticism that continues about the secular opposition is that it is disorganized. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think that the secular opposition in its formal garment, is very disorganized, and it's not very united. But all the more that really just challenges that this is between secular opposition and ruling Islamists. It's really between people and Islamists, and this is why you can see thousands and hundreds of thousands of people marching without the secular opposition leaders really motivating them. We saw in between the 2 days of the referendum them calling out for marches, and people didn't respond. So what I'm trying to say is the secular opposition as a political front or political actors, they don't have a lot to do with the disenchantment that most of the people in Egypt feel. The fact that they could not organize so well is actually a testimony to how bad things are with all this opposition, with not very reliable leadership. So there you have it, people on the streets already against the Islamists and the lies of the Muslim Brotherhood. We've seen campaigns that we're running more than 70 shows on the streets, screenings, showing the lies of Ikhwan. This is something that the opposition cannot organize because they are not very organized and they cannot motivate people. People out of their own accord have taken the contradictions in Ikhwan's statements, and they've shown them in their neighborhoods all over Egypt because they are very angry at being lied to.
All right, well, let's take a broader look then at some of the main issues at stake here and some of the biggest challenges facing President Morsi's government. In the last 2 years, Egyptian society has become increasingly polarized, with liberals, leftists and secularists on one side and President Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood on the other. Part of that divide is the perception that the Muslim Brotherhood is trying to keep as much power as it can. The challenge for Morsi is convincing the Egyptian people that he is a leader for all Egyptians. And Egypt's most pressing problem is its economy. 2 years after the revolution, Morsi will have to address the demands that brought people onto the streets: better wages, more job opportunities, and a more just society. And we touched on a number of those issues already, but the biggest of all to most Egyptians, of course, is the current state of the economy. And no matter how you measure it over the last 2 years, it has simply gotten worse. Wael Eskandar.
Yes, it certainly has gotten worse, and there's a lot of doubt about the capability of this current leadership to take our economy forward. Basically, they're not looking for consensus, but maintaining the status quo and basically taking on the role of the former NDP members of being dominant in the economy. Also, we have a lot of a huge lack of transparency with the IMF deal, for example, about what austerity measures will be taken. And I think that the fact that Morsi's government has not been able to instill trust in its own people is a testimony to how bad things are and how uncertain international actors are about the current government. The economy is a huge problem, and the political manner in which governance has been held, it's not very conducive to the economy at all. And as long as there's this much distrust between the government and the people, the economy, unfortunately, will have to suffer.
Hussein Ibish, how much is the government to blame for the current state of the Egyptian economy? I mean, is it all their fault, if I can put it that way? I mean, anytime you see an upheaval at this level, this sort of thing was expected, wasn't it?
Probably yes. And actually, Egypt's economy was in trouble anyway. It was in trouble, big trouble, under Mubarak. And given the upheaval, you're right. It's one thing that a massive uprising and a regime change and a revolutionary situation, I don't say a full-fledged revolution, but a revolutionary situation, is not good for business. Let's put it that way. So obviously there's been an additional economic blow on top of Egypt's existing parlous situation. And I think this is one of the few areas of popular grievance that is hard to place squarely at the feet of the new government, of the Morsi government. I honestly, I think the biggest critique that you can give them on the economy is actually the one that Wael just laid out, which is that it's very hard for them to make the kind of difficult, far-reaching, visionary decisions on the economy that can slowly turn Egypt around without massive public consensus on it, and they don't have that. So that, in a sense, that's the biggest complaint you could give. But to be honest with you, there is another one, which is that they don't have a vision. They don't have really an economic policy different than anybody else's. They do have a lot of vulnerability on the question of interest or usury, depending on how you want to look at it, which is, complicates the IMF loan. But in the end, the IMF loan is a stopgap assuming it comes through, which I think it will. And it'll help tide Egypt over a little bit. But Egypt's economic problems are, I mean, without being an economist, it's obvious to me, they're structural, and they have to do with the size of the population and the location of the population. It's just very hard to generate sufficient jobs for the number of people in Egypt and how concentrated they are.
Let's talk a bit more. Let's talk a bit more about that IMF loan. Then one of the among the conditions for taking that loan is that the government has to enact massive austerity cuts. Isn't that just going to bring more economic pain on the country?
In the short run, it'll bring economic pain to individuals and families and ordinary people. And so I think that's clear. And in that sense, the government may find some difficulties with it and be blamed not only for taking a loan at interest by their own supporters, but also because of the austerity that goes with it. On the other hand, there'll be a certain infusion of cash. And it's a pretty sizable loan. It won't last for a long time, but in the meanwhile, along with austerity, there'll be money to be spent on other things. So I'm not sure how ultimately destabilizing the loan itself is, though it's controversial on multiple grounds, you know, as Wael was saying, and I think also for the reasons I was laying out. But on top of that, it's not going to solve the problem. So ultimately, it's a little bit quixotic in a sense, if you look at the economy, to want to be heading the Egyptian government, say, over the next 2/3-4 years, because whoever is in power is going to be dealing with a huge and growing economic problem. And, you know, it's sort of a backlash is virtually inevitable on that, IMF loan or no IMF loan.
All right, well, let's get a small sample then of what ordinary Egyptians have had to say on this in Cairo. Here's some of that.
Morsi assured us and promised that he would fulfill the goals of the revolution, but I see him coming to only fulfill the goals of his own party. He has split the nation into two sides, but the revolution will continue until it fulfills the demands of the people.
Political path is blocked in front of this constitution. On the other hand, the revolutionary path is our only tool to bring this constitution down and write a new constitution that represents the revolution.
We're here to realize the demands of the revolution that have not been met. There is a lot of injustice, a constitution that does not represent the Egyptian people.
So clearly a lot of anger among Egyptians there still over what's happened over the last 2 years. And Wael Eskandar, if I could turn back to you, one of the things that people on the government side are saying about the opposition is that by constantly taking their anger to the streets in their opposition to what the government is doing, they're only perpetuating unrest and the sense of instability in the country, which is only having a knock-on effect. What do you say to that?
I would say that they've left people no choice but to go to the streets, because dialogue is unfortunately not working with the Muslim Brotherhood. They've broken every lie and every dialogue with people, with opposition, or with the people that with the promises they've made publicly. Ever since the start of the revolution, they've been implicated in underhanded deals, like when they met with Omar Suleiman before the Battle of the Camel, and they agreed to clear the square in exchange for releasing Hayat and Hassan Malik. And this is something that a lot of ex-Ikhwan members, former Brotherhood leadership has brought to light, such as Abdel Menam Abul Futuh, Muhammad Habib, Hazem Abu Khalil. All of them have relayed this story of these underhanded deals, and what we see is just basically the Muslim Brotherhood not fulfilling any of its promises. Let's take a look at, for example, at the Constitution. Morsi promised that there would be consensus before putting it to a referendum. That is a promise he broke. So if you go to another dialogue and you agree with things, agree about things with the Muslim Brotherhood, what you end up having is a leadership that does not even respect its own promises. And so therefore they're taking it to the streets. The Muslim Brotherhood themselves have been blaming everyone else for their failure. For example, Sadiq Katatni, he blamed Mubarak for for the train accident in Badrashin, or you know, something very ridiculous that just they're trying to blame other actors on their own failures. They have power. They have the ability to make policy that will change things, and yet what they're doing is just concentrating on getting their people in the positions of power so that they dominate the political scene, but not necessarily making the reforms that will make the country a better place for the rest of the Egyptians.
Let's put that to Hussein Ibish then. The Muslim Brotherhood is simply interested in power and not much else.
Yes. Which you would, the only real retort to that, honestly, is to question the extent to which any long-standing, well-established, highly organized political party is interested in anything else, and that's it's a fair question. I mean, that would be a response that is reasonable. But yeah, I mean, I think they've demonstrated that pretty well, and I don't think there was any exaggeration on behalf of Wael just now. I think it's fair to say they've broken virtually every promise they made, including not putting up a candidate for the presidency. You know, again, the kind of only comeback to it is what's different about everybody else. And I think it's possible to make the case that there are parties that are more conducive to dialogue. But the retort to that would be, well, they're not doing very well at the polls, are they? And so, you know, you can go round and round. But ultimately, I think nobody should confuse the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt or elsewhere with Democrats or with revolutionaries and grassroots activists. They're none of that. They are a political party, and their aim is power, and their agenda is well established. That's all pretty clear. Their agenda is mainly social and cultural, but still it's well established.
All right. Well, if you're on Facebook, I want to let you know that we've been posting this very topic on our Facebook page, and we just want to gauge some of the reaction that we've been getting now. Here's Susan, who says, the turbulences Egypt is going through right now don't have anything to do with religion. It is a power struggle between president wannabes and the rightfully elected regime. That is pretty much the sentiment that we have been hearing in some of this discussion. Abu Bakr says Western countries are all shouting as if the Egyptian people are not the one who voted for the Muslim Brotherhood. Give them a chance to correct decades of Western-backed Mubarak misrule and dictatorship. And Lyndon says, in the interests of all Egyptians, the government must be secular. There are Christians in Egypt and other religions. Not everyone should have to abide by Sharia law. So just a sample there of what people have been saying online, and we want you to keep those comments coming in as well. Wael Eskandar, if I could turn back to you on this. How do you see things developing over the next few months then?
I think it's very, very difficult for the Muslim Brotherhood to retain their power of governing and to actually, you know, push the country forward without making some very serious concessions. The rhetoric that this is just about people who want to be presidents or not, for example, is just something the Muslim Brotherhood has pushed forward. It's a 51% mandate for Mohammed Morsi, which is not exactly a majority even. And the fact that he's done autocratic, he's made autocratic decisions has definitely influenced his legitimacy, because the democracy is not just about the election box, it's the ballot box. It's about more than that. It's about upholding minority rights. So I think it'll be tumultuous for quite a bit unless they change their attitude.
Hussein Ibish, I want to give the last word to you in the less than a minute that we've got left. How do you see things playing out then over the next few months? Are you optimistic about the future?
Well, not particularly, to be honest with you. I think it's going to be difficult. I don't have a crystal ball, obviously, but I think the challenges are greater than the answers, and I think the problems of the government are going to continue to accumulate. And I don't know essentially how they get out of this. I think that the slow confrontation with the deep state and with the opposition the popular opposition continues to grind down.
That's going to have to be the last word. I want to thank both of our guests, Wael Eskandar from Cairo and from Los Angeles, Hussein Ibish. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, if you want to send your feedback by email to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks again for watching. Bye for now.